The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right.
Hi, everybody.
So-
We're live. We're live a couple minutes early here, but you can see us and our panelists. We just wanted to make sure everything's working. We're coming to you from all parts of the globe today. We'll get the presentation up here in a minute, and we'll get going. Thanks, everybody. All right, we're just shy. We're 1 minute out. If you don't mind, if you're on here now and you can hear me and you can hear me clearly, shoot me a message. Tell me where you're calling in from today, what state, what country. That'll also let us know that everything's functioning well here today. And you can go ahead and just do that by shooting in something on the questions dialog box. Awesome. So getting feedback, looks like people are able to hear us. It is noon here on the East Coast. We have people calling in from all corners of the U.S. so far. Corpus Christi, Texas, Mesa, Arizona, Durango, Colorado. Hope everything's going all right out there, especially in Colorado and the West Coast. Albany, New York, Minnesota, and on and on and on. So awesome. Thank you guys very much for being here today. I'm Shawn LaVana. I'll be the moderator today. I'm very excited to have you all here to talk through some of these big challenges that we've all been going through lately, which are we've got thrown a big curveball here about 6 months ago. As HR pros, what do we do to ensure that we are compensating for it and thinking not just about what we can do right now, but more about what can we do as a best practice period. And so we're going to start talking about that. It will envelop this broader picture. But here's our panelists today, and let's dive into each of them. First with us today, we have Iwo. He is a remote work advocate and co-founder of Remote How. It's the world's leading platform for remote professionals with more than 25,000 people from 128 companies in there. Remote How works with the world's top remote companies like GitLab, Prezi, and Dois, and to help everyone achieve freedom of choice about where and when they work. He's been featured by the BBC, Forbes, and Business Insider for the remote work revolution, and we're excited to have him here today. Also with me here today is Nathan. Nathan's the Senior Director of HR for Freshworks in North America. In this role, Nathan is responsible for the full scope of HR and facilities. He partners closely with the go-to-market, customer experience, and executive teams in the region. Prior to Freshworks, Nathan held HR leadership roles in both GE and Cisco. We also have here today Sravan. Sravan's been working with startups that have global presence for the majority of his career. With about 10 years experience, he's been managing talent acquisition and branding practices for organizations. He's been part of large-scale recruitment events for both lateral and campus hires, and he heads up the global HR function at Signeasy, where he's been instrumental in putting several remote work practices into place and driving a pro-remote culture seamlessly. And last is me. I do some stuff here at Signeasy. My background is in a lot of HR tech, both through PayFactors, Virgin Pulse, and ShapeUp. So I'll be here. You can check out some previous podcasts I've done, but I'll be here to moderate and do my best here today. One thing I do want to mention kind of off the gate, and we're going to send this link out in the chat because I know it's a little bit hard to type random alphanumeric codes. For everybody that's here today that signs up for Signeasy, we're doing a partnership with Feeding America, where for every registration we get from this event, and it's tracked uniquely from that link, we're going to donate 10 meals to Feeding America. So we're trying to do a little bit of good in this time, and for everybody that participates and signs up, we'll donate those. All right. So for the topics today, what we did is we basically broke them down. They fell into a couple, I think, three main categories for us. And some of this stuff is, like I said, there's going to be talk of just general best practices because right now is a really key time to look at what you've done and what you can do. And it might be a good time. These types of events create catalysts for change. They create opportunities that we can harness. So where you might not have been thrilled with what you did as part of your HR practices, well, maybe now it's time to think about that and not update it just for like the remote capabilities or the remote work scenarios, but overall, what are some good things that you should be doing? And so in these three categories, the first thing that really came in for us was resume screening and assessment. And so we're going to dive into each of these. And it's a panel discussion today. So we're going to have people kind of jumping in from the panel. If you have questions, go ahead and type them in, and I'll do my best to moderate those and bring them up as it pertains to the conversation that we're having. Worst case, we get to them at the end. So go ahead and chat those in, and we'll answer them. And let's get on with our first question then. So there's a ton of tools to support screening, right? You're getting all these candidates in. How do you screen them in terms of their applicability for the job? How do you decide which ones are good for you? And I think, Nathan, I want to start with you on this one. I think you have some experience and some thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for putting this together. I'm really happy to be partnering with Signeasy and Remote How on this. I think this is a great topic, and I'm excited to really learn from my peers on this call as well. So excited for the dialogue. You know, I'll just kind of give some context about what I view day to day as a challenge in my role as an HR leader. I don't know if this resonates with other people, but I happen to get inundated like all day, every day from well-meaning business development folks and account executives from the latest and greatest HR tech screening solutions, right? And there's amazing stuff out there. Like there really is some amazing stuff out there. But the problem is very fractured. In other words, like there might be like a very specific use case that is really compelling, but it doesn't necessarily address a broad host of issues that you might be dealing with as an organization. And so just my own personal experiences, I get like flooded with, people trying to set up meetings and demos and things like that for me. And I have even a hard time just filtering out all of that. And so that's a challenge that I face. I'm sure many HR leaders as well on the call probably face this as well, which is how do you separate what's really going to work for you from the noise? And that's a real challenge because you could spend your whole work week just talking to account reps and replying to emails and things like that. So, there are a couple of things that I think are important to me as I look at what a tool might do for me. I know it's a very buzzwordy sound, but I do sounding answer, but I do feel like there's merit in what I'm about to say, which is whatever we do from a talent acquisition standpoint, we have to do it with the eye of scale. What can help our teams scale to be more effective in talent acquisition activities? Anything that we can do to help us identify the best talent in a great way that will eliminate bias is really, really important. When I was at Cisco, we used HackerRank as a good example of that. Some of you may have been familiar with HackerRank, but the thing that was really cool at Cisco that we used HackerRank for was blind hiring. And one of the things that we identified a HackerRank for was, we really wanted to move the needle on diversity, and we really wanted to change how we viewed our hiring approach, which is we keep finding the same people from the same schools with the same background, and the organization was pretty much, we hadn't moved the needle very, very far on diversity. But the great thing about HackerRank is what it was a very detailed competency-first approach that allowed us to make assessments on fit without even having someone's name on a resume, which was great because we were able to see if someone's skills shone through first. And then when you got to the interview process, it was almost a formality at that point. And I don't want to say it was just a rubber stamp, because certainly there are things that can come out in an interview that is important. But if you look at any of the research, right, organizations tend to rely heavily on interviews as like the sole mechanism for identifying talent. But the research is compelling, which is interviewing is flawed. It's not a very good selection tool. So if you can find selection tools that really get to the heart of the competencies, like HackerRank and a tech environment, I think really works. And that can really help move the diversity needle forward, not only from a gender diversity standpoint, but also opening it up to people who may not have college degrees. But if they can really perform well, that opens up a whole range of opportunities for you to be an inclusive culture. So there's more I have to say on it, but that's kind of my first pass.
Let me just ask you real quick too, in doing that, and that sounds like a great way to remove bias. But one of the things you said is like the interview just becomes, we have to do this. Did you do any training for interviewees or interviewers, I should say, for your team that's doing the interviews? Did you do any training to make sure they're also continuing to, probe in the right areas without showing a bias? In other words, trying to, hey, I'm cool, I like people like me. People like me are going to be good in this. Like, did you do training around that part as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, hiring managers, we found, were a little bit hesitant to really jump into this idea, which is, the first thing you look at is where you went to school, what your GPA is, and where you worked before, right? And when you don't have the benefit of that pedigree, so to speak, that's what has worked so long for some of these leaders. That was challenging. And so we did spend some time saying, like, we're going to look at it way different. And it was a challenge. It was a new muscle that we had to build. But at the end of it, it became very effective and a very popular program. And so it continues to expand even to this day at Cisco after I left. But it's just a good example of just changing the mindset and getting people comfortable doing things that they haven't normally done.
Cool. We're going to jump into some more specifics on this, but Sravan or Ivo, anything that you'd want to add here?
Yes. So,
sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
Cool. Yeah. So I would suggest taking a look how companies that were hiring for full-time remote position prior to pandemic were doing this. And one of the common themes that we've seen working with them since 2017 was that it's truly the end of CV. Like, it's not that we are just talking about it, but in their hiring reality, no one is using CV, period. Resume is that, right? So if we start from such humongous change, then it really impacts a lot of things that are happening afterwards. So to ask yourself a question, so what they were doing instead of CV, for example, that the resume, that one of the things that we noticed was that the huge focus on portfolios, on work assessments, on things that you are doing outside of work. So basically the common denominator of the three things that I just mentioned is that what you're actually producing. Doesn't matter if it's inside the work environment, that you can show your projects on Dribbble if you're a designer, or if you're a software engineer, your code on GitHub, or if you're doing work assessment, take a look, how does it look like when I work? So that would be kind of like one thing that I would strongly encourage every HR leader to look at, that having a complete change how many applications you are getting, because prior to pandemic or in the non-remote hiring setup, you're kind of chasing your candidates. And in the remote setup it's different. You have a huge inflow of applicants that you need to deal with, right? So that kind of changes the whole narrative around it. So that would be one thing around how people apply and how you should change the process. The other thing that we notice is that companies hiring remotely really appreciate the out of the box approach from applicants. So the more standard you try to apply for a job, that's maybe not the ideal approach, right? So as an recruiter, be prepared that people will be approaching you on LinkedIn way more frequently. It will be the vice versa, that you are rather chasing them. So from the workflow perspective, you should be prepared to streamline that process. And last but not least, when it comes to the first top of the funnel, I would strongly encourage to already put the focus on the culture fit, because this is the hardest part of the whole, not just remote hiring piece, but the whole remote setup in general. So the sooner in the process you're able to identify if there is a chance for a culture fit, if you can vet for values, if these people will fit into the environment that you created, that's a question if this is the environment that you would like to cultivate, or if actually remote revolution that is happening gives you a chance to redefine your culture. That would really save you a ton of time during the interview process, but then it will save you a lot of dollars from lack of the culture fit from people that you are hiring moving forward. So that would be my 2 cents at that front.
Yeah, just one quick question for you before Sravan, you can jump in here. When you're talking about resumes dead, there's other ways that you can assess candidates now, look for out of the box stuff if you're an applicant. How does that apply to, so I get how that applies to the examples that you cite, developers, designers, right? Some people who physically produce something. How does that apply to like accounting or even HR, particularly in those kind of remote situations? Do you think it's still the same case, or do you think it's still more a little bit old school there?
So you can go about this in 2 ways. So one is completely not work related. What remote companies we're always looking at is assessing some of the personality aspects. They're showing you that you're, for example, a self-starter, that you can motivate yourself, that you are doing more than just the 9-to-5 job. That kind of like shows that the mentality. So if you're not a software engineer, or if you're not a designer, but maybe you're helping after work and in some sort of charity organization, this is your selling point. This is how you're standing out from other applicants. So that would be kind of like one way how you can go about that. The work related way would be to focus on outcomes that you delivered, that you not just worked at a certain company, but that you can showcase tangible results of a change that you are able to make, or certain results. So I would always look in that case on the outcome of your work, because this is also one of the themes of remote work in general, that we focus on outcome rather than just hours that we've been working.
Makes sense. Sravan, what do you have to say on this topic?
I think I would go a step ahead in terms of identifying the right people. I may not have the flexibility to go diverse like a Cisco or a Philips, right? Because my experience traditionally has been with startups. So what I would typically do is find what my talent quotient is within the organization. So if I have 15 people coming from MIT or 25 people coming from UCLA, I will first internally benchmark that, put that in the process, put that probably, if I were to ask questions at the time of applications, I would ask the candidate if they are from specific colleges or if they have specific skill sets. Culturally, what is it that defines them as an individual? So that sets my first level of screening. So I would say that companies should definitely do a talent quotient or a talent mosaic sort of an exercise. Implement that in the tools that they're using to screen, and then go forward with the interview process. That's my thought.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks all for sharing. We're getting a couple of questions in now, but I want to move on to the next one, and because I think a couple of these things are going to roll together over the next 2 slides, and I'll bring them up to the panel then. So next question is, how do you test or interpret personality when hiring remotely? So this is one of those pitfalls that we were talking about that we can fall into, which is I like people like me are cool. How do we remove that bias and then test and interpret personality from a remote standpoint. Nathan, why don't we start with you on this one?
Well, I think, a lot of the old cliches that we may have relied on in interviewing, I think we need to really question those. So, for example, earlier in my career, popular wisdom would have said, oh, if someone's late to an interview, they're not a good fit. That means that they don't have it together. They're not a good fit. They're going to be an absolute disaster, right? That's a data point. It's something to consider, right? I think in today's world, we even need to be more conscious about making snap decisions and judgments about people. I'll share one example of a role I was involved in hiring some time back, where the candidate, for whatever reason, decided to have the video off as part of the interview process. And we made it pretty clear that, part of our interview process was, to have video on, and, it's a good way to connect and things like that. One of the pieces of feedback that we got from one of the leaders on the hiring panel was, hey, this person didn't turn on their video. What are they trying to hide, right? And it's a different world now that we are in this remote environment where people's home situations may not be exactly what you would expect to see behind them. They may have other distractions. And I think a lot of the conventional wisdom that we would always have relied on about, quick rules of thumb to determine if someone's a good fit, I think we really need to question those, right? I'm not saying if someone's late to an interview, you shouldn't consider that. I'm not saying if, someone doesn't have the video on, we should explore a little bit of the reasons why, but don't use those as single factors in terms of deciding whether or not they're the right fit. It is really, really important to be able to assess fit, but there's something that I've been coming to understand more and more in my career, which is it's less about personality and more about how they can communicate. And what I've found, at least since Freshworks has gone really pretty much fully remote in the past 6 months, is that the typical modes of communication and getting things done have shifted a little bit. And what I'm starting to see is there's a real need for high acuity in written language. And so to the extent that people can write and express ideas in complex ideas in simple ways, I think that goes a long way beyond personality. So I can't say that I've really implemented anything specifically at Freshworks yet to assess writing, but over these past 6 months, I'm starting to see a shift to where people need to be really good at communicating and writing. And so I'd actually love to get perspectives from my peers on other things that they've seen, but I'm starting to see, like, how do we assess for this in a compelling way during an interview? But I think that's something I'd like to explore more.
I want to open
Yes,
that up.
and
Go ahead, Eva. Sorry,
yes,
I was going to ask a follow-up question from the audience, but go ahead and answer that first.
yeah, I just wanted to say that this is an extremely good point, and the future of communication is asynchronous, and people need to know how to express themselves in a written way. But this is not just about expressing. This is actually helping companies become more efficient, because the more we write, the more we document, then the more efficient the work becomes. So it's kind of goes way beyond just the hiring process itself, but having this in mind that we are going into the world where asynchronous communication is one of the keys to the success, that should be also the part of the interviewing process to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, my team right now, and Nathan, I'm guessing you're to some extent the same, is 9.5 hours ahead of me, right? So what happens is when I wind up my day, a lot of times I'll do an async video that's like, here's what I learned today, here's stuff going on. That flips over, they watch it first thing in their morning, they'll send one back to me from my morning. But I think, Nathan, one of the things I'd throw out here that I found might work for communication, you tell me if I'm off here from an HR standpoint, as Sravan tucks his head. Because hey, this was we made this call to do it. We're trying to hire a product marketing lead, in the US. And one of the things that we did is we actually wrote them a letter. So instead of a job description, we wrote them a letter. And it's like, this is what the job's going to be like. Here's the things that you might run into. Here's the things you should know. And we asked them to respond with a couple of specific questions. So instead of sending me a cover letter, I want to know how you think about these things. And so it screens for that. Can they kind of understand this and respond back in a clear and articulate way? But secondly, then it starts to get me thinking about, well, how do they approach these problems? So you start to like just look at that out of the gate then too. So whether or not that's a scalable thing, it's probably not. It took a lot of time, but you know, it was one of those things that helped us out a lot. It helps us weed through the clutter of you know, just basic applicants pretty quickly. There was a question that did come in for you, Nathan. And I just want to bring this up quickly because there was something specific you said that this pertains to, which is, what do you mean by a company's talent mosaic? Isn't that what the recruiting effort is designed to flesh out?
So I think the question is for me.
Yeah.
Sorry. I was thinking, okay, go ahead, Sravan. My bad.
No problem. So essentially, talent mosaic is like a model where you create a dashboard for your internal employees as to what their backgrounds are, what the years of experience is looking like, what are the skill sets, what are the colleges that they graduated out of, and typically are they a manager or are they supervisors, are they leads or the individual contributors. So the whole dashboard gives you a talent mosaic, which you can benchmark against the people that apply to your organizations. So that's what we call as a talent mosaic or a talent quotient, total talent quotient.
So example of this potentially is Google in their early days. If you were not from, I forget all the schools, say it's like Stanford, Berkeley, Harvard, MIT. If you weren't from there, they weren't going to look at your resume, right? And so what they found over time is obviously that increases their groupthink radically, right? You have people who are almost trained to think the same way, who are from the same backgrounds, and we can get into all like getting into what college means already builds a bias into it. So what you're saying here is like understand that and then understand where you need to be more thoughtful about incorporating new and different ideas and backgrounds. Is that generally it?
That is true. Thank you.
Cool. The only other thing I'd add on this point, not to shout out any specific vendor, but I've worked with Predictive Index before and something similar to this, which also helps remove bias in but helping you understand if their personality is right for the job. Not just understanding their personality, but the hiring committee can come together. They can say, here's the attributes, and they do it by a questionnaire. That it's not like, hey, I think somebody with accounting should have attention to detail. They do it through a questionnaire, and those kind of things are sussed out. So the hiring committee does that, and then you can match that against the applicant themselves. So you're doing that personality test on both sides. What are the critical things we think this person needs for the job? And then what does this applicant have? Like, where might they be good? Where might there be weaknesses? Where are things we should pay attention to? So those kind of things can help at that very high level. Let's move on to the next one because we have a bunch to get through here still. How do you filter out the right candidates from the high volume of applications you receive? And again, Iwo brought this up as a topic earlier, that especially when you start to think remote, that can be, you know, that's a huge top of the funnel problem there. So Nathan, let me start out with you here.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, you know, the typical Google problem, right? Which is what we heard about the past 10 years, which is they really began to figuring out how to deploy AI, looking for keywords and resumes and things like that. And I think there is some merit to that, right? Like, you know, there are certain keywords and, different things that'll stand out on a resume that'll help you deal with it at scale. But, you know, with any algorithm has bias, right? And so I'd be a little bit hesitant to rely solely on technology to say like, okay, these are our first pass. There's like the AI is going to generate our first pass list. Maybe call me a little bit of a traditionalist here, but I guess I want to make sure there's a human touch in terms of the process as well. So, you know, it's a little bit of a hard one to crack, at least for me, given the fact that for some of our positions at Freshworks, we have literally thousands of people, particularly in India, that'll apply to any given opening. And there are certain things that you can filter for, like, you know, years of experience, degree, and things like that. But even still, after that first level of pass, it's really, really challenging. And that's why I think assessments, like I said, really help, right? If you can have some assessments that that you can roll out at scale, that gives some people some baseline by which you can compare. Because when you're dealing with the scale of, thousands of applicants, resumes actually start to look all the same. And recruiters, as you know, as many of you on the call will know, they spend a fraction of a second looking at a resume. And so the assessments give you a little bit more qualitative approach to that. So that's one thing that I've relied on over the years as a good way to do it. I've seen it done well in tech. I've actually also seen it done in manufacturing. Honestly, when I was at GE, we had an assessment that we used for manufacturing folks, and it was incredibly reliable. And certainly you got to be selective about the assessments that you use, but we found great results in high retention through using some assessments as a way to quickly filter out the cream for what we were looking for.
So let's go backwards around the clock this time. Sravan and then Ivo, if you want to jump in.
Sure. I think this is not one of my favorite questions to answer because I remember when I started 10 years ago, there was one position that got posted on the local job portals. I got about 5,000 job applicants. It was a generic job. It was a business development executive, but we got 5,000 applicants. And I'm somebody who likes to be fair when you assess people. I want to give fair considerations to all the 5,000 applicants. But is it possible for me? So, and then 10 years back, we had this tradition of people dropping in. I don't know if it's the same in the US and other regions, but at least in India, people drop by, they give their hard copy resumes, and you have like a handshake sort of an introduction, right? So that's totally missing now. You have like AI channels, you have like like something which is integrated into your ATS, which asks questions at the time of applications, right? So that total handshake concept is gone right now. So what I still do is after screening the resumes, I still make it a point that I speak with these candidates who are even 50% or 60% close to the jobs that we have, do like a video handshake, understand whether they're able to communicate or whether they're able to go beyond communication and comprehend with what I say. It's not just about saying hi and then I respond to them with another hi and talk about the generic skill sets, right? I can't hire for attitude. I need to know if they're really good for the job. So I pick on the body language, the verbal cues, the eye contact. That is possible to do even in a video handshake session. So I would look at all of these. And secondly, while we have assessments that are going on everywhere, like behavioral assessments, skill sets, all of these, it would be nice if the organizations send out a report to the applicants saying that, hey, you applied to this job, these were the questions that were asked to you, and this is how you did, and this is why you're either selected for the next round or you're rejected at this point of time, but thank you for your time. So I think the whole experience of whether moving forward in the process or not getting selected for the next step, it basically tells the candidate that we respect the time, and that's how I think organizations should probably move and plan their recruitment process, at least in the filtering out stage.
And Ivo, go ahead with your thoughts, and then Nathan, I know you have an extra point that I want to come back to you on.
Yes, so I think everything what has been said is extremely valid. One small point that could be important is to take a look at the applicant and look for the ones that really want to work for your company. So they're not applying everywhere. They are really applying to work for your company. And of course, this is not the majority of applicants that you're getting, but this is great because you really want people that are applying to your company, to this position, and this is what they really want. So incorporating a piece in the hiring process that could filter out these people would really pay off long term, because you really in the remote setup, as I mentioned before, self-starters, people that really care, this is the kind of people that you want, but also people that care about the values, the mission that your company has. So looking for these values, mission statements that are aligned with the applicants early on could help you to tackle the high volume that you're receiving.
Great thought. Yeah, go ahead, Nathan. What did you have to add on?
Yeah, the last comment I was going to make on this, which is, especially for startups who are building a brand presence in a certain geography, you can't rely on post and pray, which is I'm going to post a job and just hope that I get the right candidates, right? One of the things that has been critical to the Freshworks success in North America, as we've been rapidly growing over the past couple of years, is, we certainly get applicants inbound and we do all the, typical things to generate interest. But a real key to our success is a very proactive talent acquisition approach, which is the recruiters who work on my team are actively sourcing and pipelining people who fit the profiles of folks that we want to hire to join our team. And so it's not enough if you're a growing startup to just post and hope that you get the right people. You really have to have an outbound engine as well to generate the pipeline of qualified people who may not even have awareness of your company. So you've got to kind of hit it from both ends.
Yeah, great point. Great point. We have a couple of questions coming in before and we'll jump to the more questions that came in prior to the webinar, which is what we have on the slides here. We might just start bouncing back and forth more to kind of get through a few. But question for Sravan, how do you create a job description that addresses diversity and attracts diverse talent from day one? As diversity hiring has come a long way from just gender-based hiring. So how do you make sure that you're crafting a job description that's not reflecting bias, I guess is the general question there.
Sure, I think that's a great point, and the point is already made. It's not just gender biased hiring that we make these days. From my experience, in a startup that I worked, which was very travel oriented, we wanted somebody to crunch a lot of data, and we were talking to a lot of people, and there was somebody who had a physical disability who had come for an interview, and that person just said, I'm not getting hired anywhere. And we did interview that person, and we figured that he was probably the best person that we interviewed for that particular role. And what we did in the later days, once we offered him, is to create a ramp for him, because our offices were on the 19th floor. So we made sure that he had a ramp to climb onto the lifts, go to the 19th floor, and then there were paths that were created specifically for that one employee. And we created like a 6-screen monitor for him just so that he's able to perform well in his job, right? So for me, diversity is not just about a single section like an LGBT or gender diversity. It's about bringing people from diverse workforces, creating pockets of remote work culture. I can hire somebody from Singapore, somebody from Vietnam, somebody from the UK, the US, but the whole concept of creating one identity or one organization is very important for me in terms of creating a diversity.
What about to the panel? Like, are there ways that you can make sure that bias is not being reflected in your job descriptions, and that, for example, you can, even get people to the interview stage that are going to have diverse takes?
There are also some interesting tools out there. I know we've been kind of name dropping tools, but I've used Textio in the past. And for those of you who don't know about Textio, it's a really great tool. Basically, you can put a job description in there, and it will analyze the language that's in the job description to see if it's biased one way or another. And even simple things, we use this quite a bit at Cisco, but one of the simple things that came out as we were analyzing some of the job descriptions is words like, drive or competition or win. At the face of it, like, that doesn't necessarily seem like way out of line, but what that does is that skews the population who may be interested in this role. And so tools like Textio can really help you shape it to be a little bit more I guess, inclusive in terms of how the language is presented. And so you don't have to use a tool like that. As long as you're aware of the biases that can creep in, and as you're working with hiring managers and shaping job descriptions, just be aware of overly gendered terms that might skew it one way or the other, and try to make it a little bit more inclusive.
Yeah, good thoughts. All right, let's jump to the next question. And like I said, maybe we'll start moving a little bit more quickly here in the interest of time. Sravan, I'll throw this one your way. How practical is the idea of running trial projects when prospective new hires, with prospective new hires after interviews? So giving them, kind of a take-home project or something to complete that'll help you assess their knowledge of the job, their ability to do it. How practical is that?
I think for me personally, this is definitely awesome. It's because, let's say I'm interviewing somebody with 20 years of experience. I cannot necessarily justify that person's 20 years into a 2 hours interview process, right? So for me, this is awesome. What this also gives me is an opportunity for them to come back with a solution, which is not traditional whiteboard project or a time-bound project. I think they will be able to present more ideas in a take-home interview. Number two is because I have a selection of candidates doing a similar take-home interview, I can benchmark the answers and probably take the best fit for this role. And the third and the most interesting point I would like to make is from a small research that I did, was it takes out the stress. Like, you don't have the stress to travel to the office. You don't have to see the traffic. You don't have to really deal with 10 people greeting you, especially for introverts who are really good with the skill part, but not really good with presenting the ideas. I think this definitely works in taking out the stress element completely, and that gives a beautiful problem statement to you. So for me, these are personal favorites, like running trial projects. In fact, I think when I was interviewing with Signeasy, I was given a project where I was asked to create a whole HR model to scale from specific number of employees to so-and-so number of employees in 2022. From a startup perspective, I could have given any ready-to-use template, but then the idea was to give a realistic project, because Signeasy was doing specific product development. They were targeting specific talent groups in the market. So it gave me that opportunity and to go back, think through a couple of ideas and put them on the presentation, and come back the next day and present it. So I think the trial project in the interview process is really great.
Yeah, if I can jump into it and challenge a bit the third point about introverts and not seeing and talking with other people. Actually, some companies encourage this this human / like remote touch point, because those are your potential future coworkers, right? So of course it really depends on the position, but if you can facilitate a work trial and assessment that also partially involves working with other people, then you're going beyond just the skills, what you need to deliver. But then to Nathan's point, for example, you're touching a bit on communication, for example, right? Then you can also look at the culture fit, right? So of course it depends on the role, but the more you can recreate in a very, of course, small and short way the future work environment and see how this person works, the better. And this is something what, for example, Automatic does for some of their roles. So they have real projects, short ones, where they bring people in, of course, at the later stage of the interview process. They are paid projects. This is also something what I wanted to mention, is that we will see moving forward HR departments getting budgets for like really last part of the interview project, because those are the projects that people are investing like more than a couple of hours. It might be even days, but that really pays off long term again. And this is something what I keep repeating, like the more you invest in the beginning, that the less problems you will have moving forward.
So there was a comment. Sorry, Sharon. I mean, there was a comment that came in that said, test projects can also be viewed as a way to quote unquote borrow really great ideas from candidates, but doesn't guarantee applicants get the job. Win-win? That's not me saying that, by the way. That's a direct quote. I'm always very careful not to borrow ideas that way, right? Or if they have such a great idea, they should get the job, right? I mean, that kind of stuff's pretty straightforward. But what do you guys think?
I think.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, you go a step ahead and probably ask the candidate to present the case study. Ask them to present their ideas, deep dive into it, and make sure that you probably realize that they've not copied it from somewhere or the idea is their own. So I think you should have a panel which discusses the case study in length, understands where the ideas are coming from for the candidate, and take it from there. I think a panel discussion is definitely warranted for such case studies. One point I wanted to make was to make sure that these take-home interviews are not too long. By respecting the candidate's time, let's say you give a project which takes 7 days or 8 days, they might just lose the interest. But if it is too short as well, they might just think, okay, this offends me. So I think you should probably find that balance in giving out the questions. So I think balancing is also the key in terms of the take-home projects.
I have another comment I'd like to make on top of that too, which is, I've seen it done where you have a established interview process, right? And you get to the end of it, and the hiring panel's not so sure whether or not they want to make an offer to someone, and so then they say, okay, well let's add a presentation or a work product on the end of it. And I honestly don't think that's the great approach. You ought to have an established mechanism all the way through. And if you're going to have some sort of practical thing, just communicate it right up front with the candidate, right? Because if you surprise the candidate with some additional extra thing at the end, that's not a good look for you or your company. And it also surprises and puts the candidate a little bit on the defensive. And it's almost like, making them feel like they have to do extra to convince you that they're the right for the job. And that's really not the approach that I don't think many companies would like to take. So my only advice would be, whatever you do, whether it's including a project or not, just be consistent about how you do it for each candidate.
Yeah, exactly. That could put the candidate in the defensive, basically saying like, wait, you're not sure about this yet? You're going to throw something else, right? It's not, to your point, not a great experience. All right, we have a bunch more to fly through, so I'm going to try to get through as many, and I'll just call on maybe one of you, and if you're really passionate about a particular topic that somebody else has answered, jump in. But let's see how many of these we can answer and still, have good discussions around. So let's move on to the topic of remote interviews. First question in here is, what attributes do you look for in candidates who will likely work remotely for more than a few quarters? So, there's the short-term versus long-term here. Some companies right now are basically saying, we recognize this is quote unquote short-term. We may or may not assess candidates for remote work capabilities if we plan to go back in the office to some extent by X date. Or, hey, this is the new normal for us, or this is what we've always done. We need to start assessing people well for if they can work remotely. And I know we touched on this a little bit earlier in terms of, Ivo, you brought up about communication and how people can do that better. But Sravan, maybe I'll jump to you first on this one. What types of attributes do you look for in candidates like this?
So I think for me, it boils down to the skill will matrices. Like traditionally, I have looked at people with at least 70% match to the job descriptions or the kind of roles that they're responsible for. But for me, the will levels should definitely be on the top spot. They're 101% or 120% at the willingness to perform a job. That's the first attribute that I would look at. Second is being flexible around things, right? Because the nature of the organizations right now and the business is moving global, you need to cross collaborate a lot, which means that you might have to actually wake up early some days or stay up until late night a few times. So I would look at attributes where people are willing to go that extra mile. But as an employer, I would actually go back and say that, hey, you've actually worked 14 hours yesterday, just chill out for tomorrow, and you can probably come back the day after. but I would still look at an attribute where people are willing to solve problems genuinely for the organization and the willingness to solving those issues, not just specifically depend on their skill sets or their subject matter expertise. So that's my first attribute.
Well, yeah, I'd love to, if I could do a poll on the fly right now in this webinar, I would, which is, how many people right now believe that they're working more because of the reasons that you just cite, right? We used to have the commute here in the US at least, where while that's kind of somewhere in between work and personal time, it's more personal time more often than not. Now you're just working more, and how many people is that, you need plasticity. You need to be able to continue to approach problems from different ways in order to overcome that and be collaborative. And to your point, know how to balance out when that kind of stuff's happening. Real quick, anybody else want to jump in here before we move on to the next one?
I got just a quick anecdote I'll share from my own personal experience, and it has nothing to do with working remotely, but I think it applies to working remotely, which is way early back in my career. I just started at a new job, and I was picking up the phone, it seemed like every 10 minutes calling my boss, who was like some VP of HR at GE, just new to the company, had no idea about anything. She was super kind, and about 2 or 3 days into it, she picked up the phone and she said, "Nathan, you're here for a reason. You can figure it out." And for me, that was like all I needed, the license I needed to feel like I had the ability to go out and solve problems. And so, to your point, the question, which is what attributes do you look for a candidate who can succeed in a remote working environment? Someone who's not afraid to just like dig in and figure things out, because you won't have the benefit of tapping on someone's shoulder and say, how do you do this or how do you do that? It's a little bit more onus on the individual to just like dig in and figure it out when answers may not be readily apparent at the fingertips.
Yeah, I would also say one of the things up front then too, if you do bring a candidate on that way, is manage their expectations. So if they're used to being able to physically go into an office, get a team or some form of that together, it's going to be a slower process, right? It's going to take them a little bit more time to ramp up, a little bit more time to understand the intricacies of the business. And to your point, Nathan, really feel like they're making that contribution. And that can be a shift. That can be a shift for some, especially remotely. All right, I'm going to jump over the next question. There's some here that I'm going to say we will come back to you with like a really thoughtful blog post on, and we can discuss there. This is one of those because this can get into 100 different areas, and I'm just going to gloss over that for now. We'll come back. Ivo, I want to throw this one out to you. What changes should we make in the recruitment process to get started with remote hiring?
Yes, a couple of things. So maybe I'll start with actually job boards. Like everyone is using job boards to tackle the aspects of the humongous inflow of candidates. Not necessarily all of them are qualified. We see this trend not just on remote, focusing on niche job boards. So that would be one of the things that you can easily implement. So focus on niche job boards. Then the second thing is that yes, of course, you're strongly focusing on vetting for skills, but as we've already discussed, but just making sure that this message sticks, making sure that the culture vetting is in place in your hiring process. This is the key. And again, to kind of mention this again, making sure that you're embracing remote work trials, assessments, including the paid ones, which is a change to your current process. But then on top of all the technicalities, you need to kind of step back and look more broadly at the whole process, especially focusing on what is your company looking at right now, especially from the culture standpoint. Is this the culture that you wanted to continue building? Is this the culture that you wanted to thrive, or if you wanted to change it? Because that really goes beyond the hiring people. That's something that is that can be applied or should be applied to everything what is happening within your organization, right? So it's like you said in the beginning of the webinar, this is a perfect moment to look at the things that we didn't have time or we didn't see that the need to change, and actually through the remote work revolution transform your processes, including the hiring piece, into basically better ones. But I would also say more human. We in the remote work community, we this is what I noticed coming like from a heavily SaaS tech environment. People are just more human. They're smiling more. That if there is a dog in the background or if I have a bad day, I will tell you about it. So just be yourself, also in the hiring process.
Yeah, it's one of those things I think we've had to come to understand about each other generally right now. But just, yeah, personal anecdote, I was just on a call with one of my teammates and he's trying to homeschool. He's got his dad there to help with the homeschooling, but his daughter's still running back and forth between him and his dad. And it's the reality of the situation, right? We're all going to have some example that's pretty close to that right now. And the more that we can just be understanding of that with our teammates and with those that we're also trying to recruit into our company, the better, right? I think it's great advice. Be human. One of those earlier questions, which is about, the company experience, just be human. Like that alone helps start to build your employer brand and helps you stand out and helps you really attract people that are going to be of like mind that way. All right, I'm going to jump over another question. We're going to get into some of this now, employer branding and company culture. I'm going to jump over this one because we've hit on a lot of the pieces of this. And again, we'll come back with blog posts on this. Sravan, let me start with you on this one. How do you give candidates an experience of the company's culture? I think it's implied here during the hiring process.
Yeah, so I keep getting questions like, you've hired people remotely 10 years back and you're still doing the same today. You're still hiring people remotely today. Yes, I did remote hiring in 2010. I'm still doing it, but I think people don't realize that the volumes of remote hiring has exploded to 100x today. I knew at some point in 2010 or 2015 that, okay, this employee is going to come to office at some touch point. It could be a company offsite, it could be a all hands meeting. So I always knew that I'm going to meet that person. But right now, I don't know when I'm going to get back to office, right? So with that said, companies can do a lot in terms of making sure that the candidates experience what kind of culture you have internally. My first take is, when you're interviewing somebody at some stage, have a cultural round where you get somebody with 4 to 5 years experience within the organization, spend a good amount of time within your company, and ask them to speak with the prospects or the potential candidates. Then I think you can be authentic. When you're speaking about your organization, you can tell them that, hey, there is a lot of chaos, but we find a lot of order in that chaos. Or, hey, we do these weekly sprints, and that's a cultural thing that we do every week, where all of us come together as a leadership group, or all of us come together as a all hands meet once a month. Have you experienced something like this? So the candidates who are used to that would most probably think that, okay, this is great, I've experienced this. Or they might actually think, okay, this is great because I've never experienced a culture like this. Maybe I should go ahead with this offer. Or somebody might just think, maybe these guys are too primitive, so this company is not for me, right? So I think being authentic gives that personal touch, that human touch, in ensuring that you cascade your company's culture down to your prospects, and also ensuring that, somebody who's a brand ambassador or a company master who spent 5 to 6 years gets a fair amount of chance to talk about your organization while speaking with candidates. That's my take on this.
Yes, I fully agree. And one thing that we saw that companies really succeed with, in general, the interviewing process, but going beyond into their culture, embodying extremely open feedback. being very transparent, being very honest, and also about the things that doesn't work, what you can do during the interview process. If you're familiar with the radical candor, if this is a part of your culture, then you're going to also showcase this during the hiring process, and giving a negative feedback to the candidate. Even if there is a chance that they will be hired, gives you a chance to see how they react to such feedback, right? But also gives them a glimpse, like how the culture really looks like. And it's not just it's always amazing, but also there are tough conversations. So to what has been already said, be authentic, be show that the real side, hopefully the good side, so the candidate can really get the feeling.
I'll just add one other point on top of what has already been shared, which is I think some companies, for whatever reason, forget that interviewing is actually a two-way process, which is you are assessing a candidate, but the candidate is also assessing you. And for some reason, companies and hiring managers forget that. And I've heard over the years, say, well, if they really wanted to work for us, they would do X, Y, or Z. And this is a two-way relationship. And if you bring just a little bit of understanding and humility to the process, I think that goes a long way. That just shapes every level of communication and interaction you have with the candidate, just remembering that piece.
100% agree.
Yeah. I think a lot of companies also forget to share feedback at the end of interviews, especially for your leadership roles where you interview and then you just ghost the candidates for 2 months or 3 months until they literally trouble you on WhatsApp or FaceTime and ask you for feedback, right? So I think organizations should also move into the direction of providing feedback readily, which can constructively help candidates, at least in the remote setup, because a lot of things might be misconstrued or not understood well during interview process. So it's important to share feedback.
Yeah, there's a comment from.
And
go ahead, Ivo, go ahead.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
There's a comment from Michelle who said, "Yeah, be real with candidates. Misrepresentation of a job, culture, or position is the worst for a candidate." And that's right, because you're going to give them a bad experience one way or the other. Then they're either going to have a false expectation of what it's going to be, or you're going to potentially expose them to something you shouldn't too early. So be direct about it.
Yeah, and also to the point when candidates are assessing us and we hear their feedback, we should look at this as a potential to improve ourselves, to improve what we are actually doing, to turn the potential hiccups or in general the feedback into our learnings.
Yeah, great point. And so, sorry, a poll's launching here just because we're up against time.
Yeah, I was like, oh, kind of.
So we're just up against time. It's 1 o'clock here on the East Coast. Everybody on the panel today, thank you all very, very much for participating. We didn't get to a bunch of questions today, and so we will do our best to get all of these into blog posts, and we'll share them out. So be on the lookout for those in the coming days. And then the only other thing I'd say here as we're flipping through is, again, remember, if you sign up, you get 10 free meals to Feeding America. So we thank you, they thank you, and we're all doing a little bit of good right now. So thank you, everybody who's attended today. Thank you, panelists. These were all great takes. We greatly appreciate your thoughts and all the feedback that we got through the different questions. If there was anything we didn't get to today in terms of the questions, we'll reach out to you. So with that said, thank you guys, and we will see you soon on the next one.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you so much.
I had a great time. Thank you.
Ciao, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.